Hi, my name's Mark and welcome to the channel. This video today is a request from one of my viewers to show off all of my sweaters. And if you know me in real life, you'll know that one thing I'm always happy to talk about is my knitting. So if somebody asks me, what are you working on? Or tell me about what you've made. It's an easy conversation starter. I always have a lot to say and I'm excited to share some of the process. So that's what we're doing today. We're sitting down together to look through all of my sweaters that I've ever made. Let's get into it. In my knitting journey, I started with a scarf and later moved to a sweater. It was a real goal for me to be able to make a garment for myself. I thought that was a really cool idea that you could actually make something, and I'm still, to this day, very impressed with anyone who is able to crochet, knit, weave, sew garments for themselves. I think it's really cool. You have such control over the material, the colors, the fit, and that excites me. It wasn't until I started working at my local yarn shop, maybe 2 years ago, that I realized I didn't have many sweaters I'd ever made for myself. I think I had 2 sweaters, and anything else I had made had been gifted to other people. And that's great, that's fine, gifting is wonderful, but all of my colleagues were wearing sweaters they had made, cowls, wraps, different things to show off patterns, yarn that we sold in the store, and it hit me, I need more than 2 sweaters. I was wearing these 2 sweaters back and forth for the whole winter, and we have pretty long winters here in northeastern Ohio. And I realized I need more variety. I want more sweaters in my wardrobe. So I set out for the year of sweaters, which is what I called 2023. And in that year, my goal was to make a sweater each month. So I had a list of favorite patterns that I thought I might make, and then throughout that year, other things came my way and were inserted into the list, into the schedule, and I ended up with 15 sweaters from that year. So it worked, it was great, and now I've got a wardrobe full of sweaters that I can wear when I'm at work, when I'm traveling, and that I enjoy. They all tell a different story. So let's dive in and start our sweater story time. Let's start with a sweater vest. This is the Eniskillen vest by Courtney Kelley, and I made it out of cricket from Kelborn Woolens. Cricket is a sport weight, some people call it a fingering weight, merino wool, and it's a tweed yarn. So as we look at this, you'll see flecks of tweed in the various colors. It's also a fairly rustic yarn. It's kind of thick and thin. It's a single ply, so you don't get the same evenness of 2-ply, 4-ply, 8-ply, but I enjoyed it. I have some videos where I talk about this project, and one of the challenges in making it was working with the thick and thin yarn, feeling the stitches move through my hands. I felt like I was making mistakes, and so I'd look down and I was fine, but it took some coordination. It was a different fiber for me to work with. However, I'm really happy with the look. And some of these clips as I'm talking about all these sweaters will show me actually wearing them, and then others will be close up here at the desk. I think this is a beautiful colorwork pattern. It's pretty simple as far as color work goes. You're never using more than 2 colors in a row, and you also have several rows where you have a break and it's just the background color. So if you're new to color work, if you're looking for an approachable color work project, this is a great one because the pattern is minimal. It also has no sleeves. So the pattern, the whole project ends up working up pretty quickly. And it's also a project that's steeked. It's made where you have a steek channel for the sleeve openings, and you also have a steek channel for the V-neck. And so as you're working in the round, you're creating this tube of fabric, and later you reinforce that steek and you trim, you cut the sweater vest open. Again, I've got other videos about this project. I'll pop the thumbnails up here on the screen. So if you want to learn more about it, you can go watch those. I enjoyed this project, and it's something I would make again. I would do it in different colors, or I would at least use Cricut again. I'd pick some of these yarns and maybe make my own design or a different colorwork project altogether. Next up is one of my all-time favorite sweaters. This might take the cake as my absolute favorite. This is the field sweater, and if you are a Ravelry user, you will know that the field sweater was featured on the homepage of Ravelry for several months back in 2023 during my year of sweaters, and it was run as a knit-along at my local shop Around the Table Yarns in Shaker Heights, Ohio. And I'd never participated in a knit-along. I still haven't, but everyone was making it. Everyone was picking out colors. We were helping people in the shop to decide how much yardage they needed, etc. And my great friend Megan came to the register with these two colors in her hand and said, you could use this for the field sweater. I really, really love this simple driftwood background color. This is out of Scout from Kelborn Woolens. And then we paired a mohair for the yoke, for the detail work here. And it's a sort of forest green or pine color from Ito Sensei. And I'll put those colors up here on the screen as well. And you carry the mohair for the grain stitch, it's called, and then you drop it for the stockinette portion, and then it sort of fades away and you're just back to driftwood, or whatever your background is, for the remainder of the sweater. As far as complexity, this whole grain motif was fairly involved. You're creating sort of baubles or extra strands in your stitches, and then if you're using a mohair or a lace weight runner, it gets complicated to separate that out later. And here's a secret. When I got to this portion where you have stockinette, plain stockinette between the final grains, I was not giving enough length, enough space with my floats of mohair. So the sweater was puckering, but there was no way I wanted to pull back 15 rows of this detailed grain work with mohair. So I snipped. I took my mohair and I just cut it between those grain stitches. And you'll see here the cut ends of my mohair. And at the time when I did it, I felt a little crazy. And somebody said, aren't you worried about it coming out? And I said, I'm not. It's a non-superwash wool and the mohair is super clingy. So I said, the mohair is embedded into these grain stitches, so I'm really not worried about it going anywhere. And now I've worn this sweater for a full year. It's not budging, so that's totally fine. I don't recommend you do the exact thing I did, but I think sometimes if we have a sweater emergency or a knitting or crochet emergency, there are solutions. There are things you can do to fudge it and make it work out. And now I have really even tension here between these grains, and I'm super happy with it. A couple of reasons why this sweater climbs to the top of my ranking. The biggest is just the fit. I love a top-down yoke sweater. I think it's flattering on me. I love the amount of detail in this sweater. I think it just frames my size, my stature, and my shape really well. So when I wear this sweater, I feel really confident. I feel like I'm put together. I feel like it has enough interest to it, but I'm also really comfortable in it. So I think those are the biggest reasons. I am really happy with the color combination. So thank you, Megan. She's a rock star. And it's just a comfortable sweater. Next up, we've got another really popular pattern. This is the Weekender by Andrea Mowry, and it is a boxy sweater. This is another that I made because everyone else was doing it. I didn't finish my story about the make-along that I didn't do. So the make-along for the field sweater was happening at the shop. I wanted to participate, but then I was like, you know what? I want to be ahead of the game. I want to know what's happening so I can help people if they come in to work on this sweater. So I cranked it out in about 2 weeks before the make-along started. And then I didn't participate in the make-along. So that was just me being weird, but I loved wearing it. And then I could answer questions when people came in and they needed to know about yardage or a technique or how something was going to work out. From reading the pattern to actually knitting it up, I was able to have that reference point. So it all worked out. Back to the weekender. This is another sweater that I think is really comfortable to wear. Not everybody likes the boxy style. Surprisingly, I like the boxy style on me a lot. I usually don't like things to be too oversized. This probably has about 6-7 inches of ease when I wear it, and it's really comfortable. The boat neck is a little shifty on me, and I've seen the crew neck version that Andrea Mowry has of this pattern. I don't love the idea of the crew neck version on me, so I'm fine with the boat neck, but it shifts around. I have to adjust it as I wear it. That may just be a me thing. Anyway, it's another comfortable sweater to wear. This has not been stored super well, so I've got some creases here in the sleeves. I made this out of Rios, Malabrigo Rios, which is a very popular yarn, and I wanted to use one of the colors that would pool. And this was color Siri, and I'm really happy with the pooling. It's nice and random, sort of scattered, and I don't think I ended up with any enormous portions of pooling or bands of color. Of course, I love the detail of the slip stitch running up the center of the sweater. And Rios is a superwash worsted weight wool. It's really soft. It has a ton of drape, and it's easy to wear. This is machine washable, but I still just give it a reblock. I soak it and wash it by hand when the time comes, which is not often. So that's my weekender. Next, we've got my first cardigan. This is the Maja cardigan from Helene Magnusson, and this was sort of my first foray into real stranded color work. I had done color work projects before in tarja, smaller motifs, but I had never done anything where you're working a larger scale pattern across a sweater. And still, you'll see in these clips of me wearing it, this sweater has plenty of breaks. It has plenty of sections where you're just working one color, whether that's the center of the body or the ribbing at the top and the bottom of the sweater. But I'm really happy with the color work sections. I just thought it was a beautiful, traditional looking pattern, and my color choices are heavily based on the example photos. I didn't use the same yarn, so I did some substituting, but I'm still happy with how these colors turned out. My mistake with this sweater is that I was adjusting yarn weight. I was using a much lighter weight yarn. I still used a fairly large needle, so I'd have good drape with the project, but I ended up making a size way too big. I was thinking I needed to make a bigger size because I was using a lighter weight yarn, my stitches were smaller, I wasn't hitting gauge, and that's true. I should have made a larger size, but I overestimated. I didn't really take the time to do a proper gauge swatch, block the swatch, and then take my measurements. I just jumped into the project. So by the time I finished knitting this and was ready to steek, I was ready to cut it open and add the button band, it was way too big. I had at least 10 inches of ease, if not 12 inches of ease, where I wanted something like 5 or 6 maximum. So I had double the ease, and it just felt way too big. I'm already a large guy, and I didn't want my sweater to be falling off of me. I wanted it to fit and look kind of dressy. So in my steeking, I did cut back an additional portion of the front of the sweater, and I just made sure to line up the pattern on each half. And so I chose a place, I basted a stitch through, and then reinforced and cut that fabric open to pick up the button band, which means the back of the sweater is wider, has more fabric in it than the front, but at least the front can close without folding over on itself and having so much extra bulk. So I would do this pattern again. It was really nice to knit, super straightforward, easy enough to sort of memorize each row that I was on, but I would gauge swatch more carefully, and I would make sure that I'm going to knit the size that results in the sweater that I want. The last couple of things to note, this was my first steeked project, and I needle felted the steek and the reinforcement, which worked out beautifully. There it is, just that little column of two columns of stitches felted and just hanging out politely on the inside of the sweater. And it was my first time picking up stitches for a button band, which was fun. I mean, the instructions were good. Once I steamed it, I think it lays pretty well. And I also got to choose, I think, charming buttons for this. These are embroidered buttons from Ikigai, which felt special to put on this as a very winter-themed, a wintry cardigan. So that's the Maja cardigan. Super happy with it. It's way bigger than I wanted it to be, but it's cozy, it's easy to wear, and I might do it again or something similar that fits me better in the future. Next, we've got another sweater vest. This is a cabled sweater vest from Thea Colman of Baby Cocktails, and this pattern is Ghost in the Orchard. When I saw the pictures of this pattern on Ravelry, I was really taken. I just thought, this is perfect. I need it, I need it, I need it. And once I knit it and wore it, put it on myself in my own frame, I thought, it's not exactly what I needed. And I think the biggest shift in that was seeing it on Thea in the example pictures. The way it's staged and the way it fits her frame, I thought was much more alluring than the way it turned out for me. It's fine. I think in hindsight, I maybe should have gone with a darker color. This is so light on me. I don't know. So I don't really wear this. I might try to wear it a couple of times this season, but I think truly I've worn it twice and I just wasn't feeling it. It was great fun to knit, so let's talk about that part. You can see all of the texture here. We've got cables on each side and then this textured center to the sweater. I was on a kick with vests. I just thought I need vests. I don't know why. Maybe because they're a little bit lighter. I mean, when you don't have the full sweater sleeve, you could wear a vest in the fall, you could wear a vest into the spring, maybe a little longer than you could wear a sweater. I don't know. I think vests are tricky. Sometimes they look great, other times they look old-fashioned or too straight-laced. Here's a bit of the back. This cable pattern is beautiful, and you can see it blocked out like a dream. I love Thea Colman. I have other Thea Colman projects I've made, so you'll see others. I don't know if I have more coming in this video, but you'll see others on the channel that I've done, and they're great. The way she writes her patterns is the exact way my brain works. So I read her instruction, I think, well, yeah, exactly. That's how I would have said it. So I'm always happy to be working a Thea Colman pattern. And I think for this, I just didn't choose the exact color that suited me best. And sometimes when you look at an example and it's on one body type and then you make it for another body type, the scale shifts and it's just too different from what I imagined it might look like. But I'll give it another try. So that's my Ghost in the Orchard. Next up, we have another vest, still on my kick of vests, and this was another tangent I went off on for Petite knit patterns. This is the Sille Slipover from Petite knit, and I showed it in a video last year, and in the video I said, oh, I haven't blocked it, so I'm not going to try it on. I was going through my sweater drawer, and I found this, and I was like, what is this? I still haven't blocked it, and so I've still never worn it. So we're just interrupting the flow of the video to say I have a few things that I've made that I haven't blocked. I've got this Slipover. I have another Weekender in a different colorway. I have my Bee's Knees sweater, which is drying right behind the camera. I can't wait to show that to you. And then I've got a field cardigan out of alpaca. So all of those sweaters are things that just need to be blocked, and I haven't done because I travel and it's like, oh, it's too close to a trip for me to get a sweater wet and wait for it to dry. I don't want to leave it while I'm gone for a week. So sometimes I just forget when I'm home that I have things that need to be blocked. So one thing is blocking now. When that's finished, the next thing I'll block, I think I have about 10 different sweaters to block, either for me or ones that are going to other people, which I'm trying not to think about because it's stressful. I wish I had more places to lay the sweaters out to dry, but I don't. It has to be off limits to the cats. It needs to be in a room with good enough airflow, and I'm limited. So I have to do it one at a time. Anyway, once I get this blocked, I'll try it on and I'll show it off. But unfortunately, a number of things won't make it into the video yet, this being one of them. The next sweater to show is the Cosmo sweater by Simone Ryan. This sweater is very luxurious. It has a simple sort of repeating texture of a broken rib, and then you'll see, I guess, as I'm trying it on, a better all-over idea of the pattern. You have a cable, a simple cable that's carried down the sides, forming a point at the front and back, and then that's mirrored on the sleeves, or echoed on the sleeves, which is a cool detail. There's that cable close up. And then underneath the cable is just stockinette stitch. This sweater was made out of one of my favorite colors of Perennial from Kelborn Woolens, a light fingering weight yarn with merino, alpaca, and nylon. And I held it together with a mohair, with a lace weight mohair, again from Edo Yarns, in like an ultramarine color that matched perfectly. So it's really luxurious. It's got a great halo to it. You can see some of that halo along the side by my fingers. It's the softest thing you can imagine. It's also extremely lightweight. However, there are parts to this sweater that seem a bit inflexible. Something about the initial shaping of the sweater, the neckline, sort of the bind off at the bottom, the sleeve shaping. I wasn't thrilled with everything that happened in the sweater, and so I don't wear it a lot. When I wear it, it feels like it doesn't quite fit me the right way. It's plenty big without being oversized. I just think some of those seams, some of the joins, pull in odd ways, at least on my body. So unfortunately, I don't wear this sweater, but I think it's so beautiful. And I also don't think I would be able to pull it out and reuse the yarn because it's mohair and it's just going to cling to itself so much. So I don't know. I don't know if I'll like it more and enjoy wearing it this season, or if it's just a sweater that isn't going to be one of my favorites. So that's that. The Cosmo sweater. I want to love it, but right now I still don't love it. Now for a sweater that is again at the tip top of my favorites. This is the Oksa sweater from Caitlin Hunter. Caitlin Hunter, in a lot of ways like Thea Colman, writes her patterns in a way that just makes perfect sense to my brain. I read the instructions, I read whatever the next technique is, and I think, that's exactly what I would have said, which is fun. It's fun to feel like you're on the exact same page with the designer. There are some techniques in this that I loved. The neckline has an interesting detail as you start the project that lets the edge kind of roll forward, and that's echoed on the sleeves. And I just love the way that little bind off kind of rolls in and looks even more textured. It uses a twisted rib throughout. And then the yoke itself, it's always hard to show on camera because I made it out of a fairly dark color. The yoke itself is beautifully textured. You have several faux cables. You have this nice detail where you're carrying a strand of yarn on the front of the work. And this is one of those that I think just looks like $1,000,000 in person. It's always hard to show on camera for whatever reason. I made it out of wool stock in one of my favorite colors. I'll put it up here on the screen because I never remember what it's called. I love it. It's super duper comfortable. Wool stock blocks out so well, so it just, the body of it looks like machine knit to me. My knitting is not that even, but when I block it and come back to it, I'm like, wow, who made this? So this is my Oksa from Caitlin Hunter, one of my favorite sweaters. I couldn't remember if we had another Thea Colman pattern coming or not, but we do, it's here. This is Vesper with a twist, and it's an all-over cabled pattern on the front. The back is just done in stockinette stitch, which is a nice break. If you're new to cables or you're really into cables and you want a cabled sweater without so much involvement, this would be a great choice because you get the break for the sleeves, you get the break for the back, and it still looks, I think, really appealing. You also get a really great sort of turtleneck, like cowl collar to it, which you can adapt. You don't have to do that, but the instructions are there, and I had never used that technique, and I thought, that's cozy, that's fun. I think the only drawback for this sweater is that I used Rowan felted tweed, which, in my opinion, and in my experience here, is a really lightweight DK. I think if I were to remake this sweater out of Scout or Arroyo from Malabrigo, if I used a more substantial DK weight fiber, I think the cables would stand up a little bit better and the fabric would just feel appropriately dense. Right now it feels light as air, which is great, but for a cabled sweater, I want it to have a little more structure. And you'll see as I'm modeling it here, I don't know, something about it. It's harder to wear being so light. I want it to stay in place, stand up on its own. The other thing I did on this sweater, which I really regret, is that I was making it during a project week for some concerts I was doing. And don't mind all the wrinkles. This has been sort of haphazardly folded up in a drawer. As I was making it, I made the back too short. Not everything is done in the round, and so you end up with, you have to measure. You have to keep track of how many rows you did on the front, how many rows you need to do on the back, and I didn't keep track of it. I guessed and tried to measure it in my lap on a moving bus, which is so, I don't recommend it. It's not a good choice. So anyway, it's too short in the back, and I had already joined the shoulders. I'd already done the sleeves. So to fix that, I would have to do some major steeking or some major surgery, and I just don't think it's worth it. I think it would be faster to reknit the sweater in a fiber I like a little bit more. So the back is too short. To remedy that, when I block it, I aggressively block it. I pin the back hem down in place and I stretch the sweater so that it's even front to back, pin it all around, leave it to dry, and then that holds for a season. I can wear it for the whole winter and it will look correct. But after it gets wet, after it sits in a drawer for too many months, it will start to draw back up and I'll have to reblock it for the next season to get it to fit in the correct way. So that's all on me. That was not an issue with the pattern, but I regret it. I think I should have slowed down, I should have calmed down and taken a little more care with the execution. Otherwise, it's a really pretty sweater. And when I was making it, I did have a friend that was like, oh, if you ever want to get rid of this sweater, I would take it. And I kind of laughed thinking, why would I want to get rid of it? But it was like foreshadowing. Maybe I want to get rid of it because it's not the perfect sweater for me. So maybe it will get passed on and I might come back and do this pattern again out of a different DK weight fiber. I like felted tweed, and I think there are lots of projects it would be perfect for, but in this case, it was just too lightweight to stand up. You can see my finger moving through it. I think once it's blocked, it's just too airy, a little too gappy. But really pretty sweater design. I love the collar. I love the cables. And again, I would recommend this for anyone that wants a nice cabled sweater without cables all over the place. So Thea Colman, Vesper with a twist. Next, we've got baby's first sweater. This was my first sweater I made, and there's no pattern for it. I took measurements and followed a set of YouTube videos about making your own pattern based on your measurements, and then I added this Intarsia Colorwork Notre Dame logo because I was about to attend the University of Notre Dame. And A weird thing I used to do for every sweater I made was to hold all of my yarn double. I didn't trust that I could make a sweater out of one strand of wool and be happy with the fabric I was making. So it's a really heavy, sort of like bulky weight sweater, which is good for the winter. It's hard to wear any other time when it's not absolutely freezing because there's so much fabric. And I also have the sort of vintage band, vintage football style on the sleeves, which I thought was great. And when I was at the University of Notre Dame, when I wore this sweater, when people would see it, they would flip. They'd say, "Can I buy this? You should sell it at the bookstore," all these things. And because of copyright laws, because it's not really profitable to knit things for people, mostly because of the copyright laws, I said that's not possible. That's nice for people to say, "Oh, that looks great, you could sell it," but you can't sell it. So I made several of these sweaters for friends as gifts because I was learning how to knit and I wanted the experience of working with fiber and making sure I could make something that fits someone else. But yeah, great memories in this sweater. I think I'll continue to wear it probably for the rest of my life, especially if there's any sort of school reunion or any reason to show my my school pride. So I'm really happy with this. I had to redo the top portion, the sort of shoulder shaping and the bind off at the top, joining the shoulders, doing the neckline. I did that part of it probably 4 times because it was my first sweater. I wasn't working from a pattern, so it was a lot of trial and error to get it to fit right. But I am happy with the fit. It's a little oversized all in all, but that's okay. I'd rather something be a little too big than too tight. And that's my story of my first sweater. This next garment is a little bit tricky. First, it's crocheted, it's not knit, and I wanted to crochet a sweater with my great friend Megan, and we decided on the Faraway jumper by Iron Lamb, and it's a granny stitch all the way around with a little bit of color work at the top and a little bit of color work then on the sleeves, and I included it at the hem of the sweater. When I started this sweater, I was thinking, crochet might move more rapidly. I might be able to work my fabric quicker, more rapidly than I would knitting, which for me is not true, and I've discovered that. That's okay. And I also didn't love my choice of fiber. I used Remix by Barocco, which is a non-wool option. It's got 1,000 different things in it, and they're nice things. It's like cotton and linen and other things. I'll put the label here on the screen for you to see, but I don't love the feel. It's not bad. It's soft. It's got a decent amount of give, but it still holds its shape. It just feels heavy. And in hindsight, I should have used wool. I love wool. And I know that now. Almost every sweater I have is made out of wool or sock yarn that's wool and nylon. And I love the way it breathes. I love the way it blocks. I love the way it takes care of itself from season to season. So that's my biggest drawback with this, is that I didn't use wool. The next challenge was that there were difficulties with the pattern, mostly about the depth of the armhole, and Megan and I both experienced this. It wasn't just because I'm a man making it. As she was making hers, she got to the point where she should have separated for sleeves, it's top down, and it just wasn't nearly long enough. So we had to adapt and keep increasing, keep continuing the depth of the fabric. But after that, it was fine. It was all straightforward. So I wouldn't make this same pattern again. I would go with a different sort of granny stitch sweater pattern where I would do my own, and I would definitely use a wool or a fiber that I know I like more. So that's that. I don't wear this often, mostly because the fit is a little funny and the fabric is a little rigid. Again, to beat the dead horse, if it were wool, I could block it out better. I mean, this doesn't really do anything when I block it because it's cotton, it's not wool. That's my story. The Faraway Jumper by Iron Lamb. This next sweater is absolutely one of my favorites. It's getting one of those top spots, and this is another Caitlin Hunter design. This is the Halibut sweater, and a couple reasons I like it. One, I really like working Caitlin Hunter patterns. As I said before, they're written in a way that just makes sense to me, the sequence of the instructions, the way everything is worded, and I love color work. I especially like two-color color work, which this is an example of it. I have my navy and then my lighter color, and the detail, the color work pattern, is only used on the top portion of the sweater. So it's a lot of color work. It covers a deep portion of the yoke, but after you finish that, the rest of your work is just knitting in the round until you get to your ribbing. So this is another one of those projects that's a pretty good mix of a challenge at the start, and then later it can be TV knitting or travel knitting where you don't need to be staring at your pattern or your chart. I made this sweater out of Scout from Kelborn Woolens. I really like this navy shade. It's got some purple to it. I don't know if you can tell here on screen. I love this shade. And this lighter color, I think might be the driftwood again. I'll put the real colors up on the screen for anybody who's curious. But I'm happy with how the fiber blocks out. I'm really happy with it for color work. I'll show you the inside. You can see these floats, and then I used the ladder back jacquard technique for the longer floats so that it wouldn't poke through the front. You can kind of see the outline of the fish here, just on the reverse of the floats. I'm happy with this. It's a great weight. It's DK weight wool, non-superwash. It holds up very well to the color work. It blocks out beautifully. I think it fits me well. So I've worn it a lot. This was the only pullover sweater that I took to Shetland with us, and it ended up in a bunch of those videos, so you've probably seen it a lot on the channel, but it's fun. I think the pattern looks traditional, but it's a bit wacky because it's a bunch of fish. So yeah, this gets one of the top spots. Next, we have another very popular pattern. This comes from Stephen West, and it's his Painting Bricks sweater. I like this sweater a lot. I haven't made other Stephen West things, but I wanted to make something, and I liked the Painting Bricks texture. And he has this for socks, shawls, sweaters, and I thought I'll do it in a sweater. And this is made out of Sweet Georgia Tough Love Sock, one of my favorite yarns that's carried in my local yarn shop. And I thought I'll do black. I'll do a dark color as my background, and then I can choose some bright things. And if you're following along with my make-along for the Sea Glass project, again, I'm using an assortment of really bright colors, but besides this piece and that Sea Glass cardigan, everything else that I have is pretty muted or pretty traditional in its colorway. So these are my two sort of wacky, stripy pops of color in my wardrobe. I like this sweater. Because I did it out of Sweet Georgia, it's all sock yarn. It's very thin. It's very lightweight. I'll show you some of the inside. And all of this is just done with slip stitches. So there's no real color work here. You're just knitting most rows, you purl some rows, and then you slip your stitches and carry them down. So this is a beginner-friendly or advanced beginner project. It's not color work. You're not using 2 strands at a time. And it's funky. I've seen a lot of other examples of the sweater. Some of them look very traditional, very mild and calm, depending on what colors are used, or it can be super punchy with neons, rainbow. It's kind of endless. The only thing I didn't care for in this sweater is that the color changes happen along the back center. So you can see them here. They're glaring. You can't ignore it. And I still attempted to do jogless stripes with my changes, but it's just where the whole pattern shifts. And so you can't hide it when it's in the back center. I have a whole video on this, so you can go watch that video if you're considering making this sweater. And I talk about, if I were to do this again, I would put that seam somewhere else. I would run it under the arm. I would run it along kind of the side of the shoulder. I wouldn't put it in the back center, because when somebody's right behind me, they see that jog up the whole pattern, which is a little frustrating, but I still wear it. I love that I used a sock yarn. I think it calls for DK, but I wanted to go lighter, and I was happy with that. So I just adjusted, checked my gauge, and I worked a larger pattern than I needed, and I'm happy. So that's my pop of color, my painting bricks sweater from Stephen West. Next up is one of the sweaters from my intro sequence, and that is the Lighthouse Keeper by Lindsey Fowler. This is from her book Salt and Timber, and I like this pattern. I like this sweater. I was inspired to make it because one of my friends and colleagues from the Yarn Shop and Shaker had their own version using a striping mohair held together with a sort of neutral shade of wool stock. So I was a copycat and I did the same thing. I used a different base color and a different mohair, but I wanted to piggyback on that really successful pairing of yarns. So the base color in this sweater is silver. It's the same silver as the Thea Colman sweater vest I showed earlier. I'll pop it back on the screen. And then I carried a color-changing mohair, lace weight mohair, with that silver, and this is the result. We get this gently shifting sort of pastel rainbow sweater. And again, because of the mohair, you get this halo. You can probably see it around the edges here. It's super soft. It's also super warm. And up close, you can see these colors as they shift. The pattern is raglan construction, and it's pretty straightforward. It wears like a sweatshirt, and I think in the pattern there aren't any short rows for the back neck, but I added my own because I wanted a little bit of elevation there so the sweater would sit on my body a little bit better. So I like this. It's super cozy. It's easy to throw on over other things, and it's what I grab when it's really cold out or I'm going on a trip and I just want cozy, everyday, not too dressy outfits. And that's that. Really soft. It's amazing how much mohair changes another fiber. This next sweater is not one of my own, but it's one that I made for Ned, and this is Modern Love by The Bean Knits. This fiber is super local to me. When I say local, it's from sheep that are local, it's milled locally and dyed locally. So it's a special thing to get to use for a sweater. So I bought these 4 colors as a kit from Cat of Why Not Fibers. And then the rest of the yarn I used is from wool stock, Blue Sky Fibers, worsted weight, non-superwash wool. And again, this pattern is from the Bean Knits. I really like the design, and Ned really liked it. He saw it as part of her trunk show, and he voiced interest in it, so I got to work on the sweater for him. Fit-wise, things turned out all right. I had an issue with color bleed in this sweater, and I also had an issue, bigger issue, with the neckline. The way the sweater starts and then the shape that's left to then pick up for your ribbing was really jagged. And I have a whole video on this. You can go watch it. You might have already seen it if you've been with me on the channel before. Eventually we solved it. I got great advice from one of my lovely viewers, and that advice was to just trace the shape of the neckline I wanted, pick up the stitches, and then steek, needle felt, and steek the sweater so that I could cut off the jagged portions and end up with a rounded neckline. So that's our needle felted portion there. I mean, it looks very discreet and it's not bulky at all. So now we have a rounded neckline. I still think the pattern starts very, very close to the neckline. I don't love that, but that's okay. I love the colors. Cat's colors are just incredible. They're gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. So this is Modern Love for Ned. I mentioned that we might not see my bee's knees sweater from Thea Colman, but it's finished. So here it is. It's just finished drying. I finished blocking it, attached my buttons, so it's all set. I wore it for the first time out in public today. And I love this sweater. This is one of just a few cardigans. Maybe it's only my second cardigan that I have, and then another is soon to be finished. And I love the idea of a cardigan. I like that you don't have to commit to wearing your sweater all day. If it gets warm, you can shed it. If it gets cooler, pop it on easily. It's not going over the head and maybe messing up the rest of your clothes you're wearing or your hair, your makeup, anything like that. So I love a cardigan. I used to wear them, store-bought cardigans, all the time when I was younger. I think this is a gorgeous sweater. I made this out of Scout, from Kelborn Woolens, DK weight. I think it calls for a worsted weight, but Scout, I find, with my gauge, with my tension and blocking, can sometimes sub out for a worsted weight yarn. So that's what I did. I was in love with this color. This is Dandelion, one of their newer solid shades that they offer. Really beautiful cables running up the sides. The rest of the body is textured. And then you have a shawl collar, and you see my sort of goofy join here. Normally nobody sees that, but you get to see it right now. The cables that run alongside the sweater wrap around the back neck, which is a really, really beautiful detail, and they look fairly seamless in the back. But there is, of course, a seam on the inside. And the buttons I ended up with for this are a pretty dark brown, almost black, but it's a stained brown wood button. And I'm really happy with it. You'll see as I'm trying it on here, it's maybe a little long, but that's okay. I'm not unhappy with it. And I can always try to go in, reblock it, get a little bit of that length off, but I know as I wear it through the season, it'll gain a little extra length just because it's such a squishy, plush texture, which I think is a great thing. So that's the last sweater we'll look at today, the Bee's Knees cardigan from Thea Colman. So that's the current roundup of my sweater collection. As I said earlier, before last year, I only had 2 sweaters that I had ever made for myself, and so I dedicated a lot of my knitting time to the year of sweaters. And I've come out of that year of sweaters with several more, and as I mentioned, I have a few waiting to be finished, sort of sleeve island sweaters, things that need to get blocked, and then my sweater collection will grow. And I think I might find a new home for a couple of the sweaters that just don't suit me, and someone else can enjoy them. And I think that's a good way to live. I don't want to end up with too much of something that's just sitting. But I appreciate the interest for whoever asked for a tour, a parade of sweaters. I enjoyed getting them all out and sharing them with you today. If there's interest, I might sit down and do a sweater maintenance video in the future, talking about dealing with pilling, keeping the sweaters in good shape, reblocking them, washing them by hand, things that are machine washable, whether or not we ever do that, and how I store them. There are lots of different things you can do to be proactive to keep something you've made by hand in really incredible shape. And that's the idea. You want whatever you spent time making to be enjoyed, whether it's by you or someone else in your life. So I appreciate you spending this time with me as always. I hope you saw something you liked. Maybe you saw a pattern you'll want to make. And please, 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 if you have patterns that you think would suit me and my style, my taste, let me know what they are either in the comments below or in a message. I'd love to hear from you. As always, thanks for choosing to spend this time with me, and happy knitting, crocheting, and crafting to you. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.